The gunshot split the summer evening like thunder. Marcus dove behind his own patio furniture as Karen Whitfield stood at his fence line, smoking pistol trembling in her manicured hands. "You perverted freak," she screamed, her HOA president, badge glinting in the dying light. But what Marcus didn't know was that Karen's security cameras had been recording everything, and the footage would soon reveal a truth so shocking it would destroy everything she'd spent 20 years building. In Willowbrook Estates, Marcus Chen had always believed that good fences made good neighbors. Standing in his meticulously maintained backyard at 1247 Maple Lane, he surveyed the 6-foot privacy fence that separated his property from the Whitfields next door. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his vegetable garden, and he could hear the distant hum of Karen Whitfield's pool filter through the wooden slats. At 34, Marcus had worked hard to afford this house in Willowbrook Estates. The mortgage payments stretched his software developer salary thin, but owning a home in this prestigious subdivision had been worth every sacrifice. The neighborhood was quiet, safe, and governed by an HOA that maintained property values with military precision. Karen Whitfield was that HOA, as the Homeowners Association president for the past 8 years. Karen ruled Willowbrook Estates with an iron fist. Wrapped in a velvet glove of suburban civility, she was 47, impeccably dressed even when checking her mailbox, and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of every covenant, condition, and restriction in their community bylaws. Marcus had learned this the hard way during his first month. In the neighborhood, when Karen had left a politely worded but firm letter in his mailbox about his garbage cans being visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup, the letter had been printed on official HOA letterhead and cited Section 4.2, one of the community guidelines. Since then, Marcus had been the model resident. His lawn was edged to perfection, his mailbox bore the regulation black numbers, and his outdoor furniture adhered strictly to the approved color palette of earth tones. He attended monthly HOA meetings, paid his dues on time, and even volunteered for the annual neighborhood cleanup day, which was why Karen's sudden appearance at his back fence on this particular Tuesday evening caught him completely off guard. Marcus, her voice carried that peculiar blend of authority and barely contained rage that he'd heard her use on residents who dared to paint their front doors unapproved colors. "We need to talk, now." Marcus looked up from where he'd been watering his tomato plants. Karen stood at the fence line, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled despite the heat, wearing a crisp white blouse and dark slacks that probably cost more than his monthly car payment. Her blue eyes blazed with an intensity that made his stomach clench. "Good evening, Karen," he said carefully, setting down his watering can. "Is everything all right? Don't you dare pretend you don't know what this is about," she snapped, her manicured fingers gripping the top of the fence. "I've been watching you, Marcus. I've seen what you've been doing back here." A chill ran down Marcus's spine despite the summer heat. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. What exactly do you think I've been doing?" Karen's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Playing innocent won't work with me. I have eyes, Marcus. I can see into your yard from my second-floor bathroom window. I've seen you out here, touching yourself." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He staggered backward, nearly tripping over his garden hose. "What? Karen, that's completely insane. I would never. Don't lie to me," she shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "I saw you last Saturday afternoon, and again on Sunday morning, standing right there by your vegetable garden, hands all over yourself like some kind of pervert." Marcus's mind raced as he tried to process the accusation. Saturday afternoon he'd been in his garden, but he'd been checking his tomato plants for hornworms, running his hands along the stems and leaves to feel for the telltale damage. Sunday morning he'd been applying sunscreen before starting his yard work, rubbing it on his arms and neck. "Karen, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," she interrupted, her voice rising to a shout that would surely carry to the neighboring houses. "I know what I saw. You're a disgusting pervert, and I will not have that kind of behavior in my neighborhood." The emphasis on my neighborhood wasn't lost on Marcus. Karen had made it clear from day one that she considered herself the unofficial queen of Willowbrook Estates. Every tree, every mailbox, every blade of grass fell under her purview. "Please, just listen to me," Marcus said, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "I was gardening on Saturday. I was checking my plants for pests. And Sunday morning, I was putting on sunscreen. That's all. There was nothing inappropriate about anything I was doing." Karen's eyes narrowed to slits. "Sunscreen," she repeated mockingly. "Is that what you're calling it now? I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. Marcus, I've raised 2 children here. I will not stand by and watch some sicko turn it into his personal playground." The unfairness of it all crashed over Marcus like a wave. He'd done nothing wrong. He'd been a model neighbor, following every rule, respecting every boundary, and now this woman was standing in his backyard, accusing him of something so vile that even the suggestion made him feel nauseous. "Karen, you're making a serious accusation," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "If you really believe what you're saying, maybe you should call the police and let them investigate." It was the wrong thing to say. Karen's face went white, then flushed scarlet with rage. Are you threatening me? She hissed. Are you actually threatening me right now? No, I'm not threatening you. I'm suggesting that if you genuinely believe I've done something illegal, you should report it to the proper authorities instead of confronting me about it. The proper authorities, Karen repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. Let me tell you something about proper authorities. Marcus, I'm the authority in this neighborhood. I decide what's acceptable and what isn't, and what you've been doing is absolutely unacceptable. Marcus felt his own anger beginning to build. He'd spent 6 months walking on eggshells around this woman, following her rules, accepting her criticism with grace. But this was too much. You're not the police, Karen. You're not a judge. You're the president of a homeowners association, and that doesn't give you the right to spy on your neighbors or make wild accusations about their private behavior. Private behavior. Karen's voice rose to a shriek. You call exposing yourself in your backyard private behavior, where children could see you. I didn't expose myself. Marcus shouted back, his patience finally snapping. I put on sunscreen. In my own backyard, which, by the way, is surrounded by a 6-foot privacy fence, specifically to prevent people from seeing into it. Not from the second floor. It doesn't, Karen shot back triumphantly. And I have every right to look out my own bathroom window. The realization hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. Karen had been watching him from her bathroom window, deliberately, repeatedly. The very behavior she was accusing him of inappropriate watching was exactly what she'd been doing to him. So you've been spying on me, he said slowly, from your bathroom window, watching me in my private backyard. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered in Karen's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by renewed fury. I wasn't spying. I was being vigilant. It's my responsibility as HOA president to monitor for violations of community standards. What community standard covers applying sunscreen? Indecent exposure. In my own backyard, where it can be seen from neighboring properties. They were both shouting now, their voices echoing off the houses around them. Marcus could see curtains twitching in windows, neighbors drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Patterson from across the street was standing in her front yard, not even pretending. She wasn't listening. This is insane, Marcus said, lowering his voice with tremendous effort. Karen, I haven't done anything wrong. I've been nothing but respectful since I moved here. I follow every rule. I attend every meeting. I've never caused any problems. Until now, Karen said coldly. But don't worry, Marcus. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. The threat was clear, and it terrified him. In a neighborhood like Willowbrook Estates, reputation was everything. Property values, social standing, even basic neighborly relationships could be destroyed by the right rumor spread by the right person. And Karen Whitfield was definitely the right person. Karen, please, he tried one more time. Just think about what you're saying. You're talking about destroying my reputation, my life, over a complete misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, she repeated firmly. I know what I saw. Then prove it, Marcus said desperately. If you're so certain, prove it. Show me this evidence you claim to have. Karen's smile was cold and predatory. Oh, I intend to. I've been documenting everything. Marcus, photos, timestamps, detailed notes. I have a file on you that would make your blood run cold. The world seemed to tilt around Marcus. She'd been photographing him, in his own backyard, without his knowledge or consent. The hypocrisy was The emergency HOA meeting was called for Thursday evening, just 2 days after Karen's confrontation with Marcus in his backyard. The community center's main room buzzed with whispered conversations as residents filed in, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. Word had spread quickly through Willowbrook Estates that their HOA president had something urgent to discuss regarding community safety and moral standards. Marcus sat in the back row, his stomach churning as he watched Karen hold court near the front of the room. She wore a navy blue blazer over a white blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her look more like a prosecutor than a suburban housewife. In her hands, she clutched a manila folder that Marcus suspected contained whatever evidence she'd compiled against him. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Karen began, her voice carrying easily across the room. I know many of you are wondering why I called this emergency session, and I appreciate your patience. What I'm about to discuss is difficult, but as your elected representative, and as someone who cares deeply about our community's values, I felt it was my duty to bring this matter to your attention. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembled neighbors. Marcus recognized the technique he'd seen it in corporate presentations, the strategic use of silence to build anticipation and importance. Over the past several weeks, Karen continued, I've become aware of behavior by one of our residents that I believe violates not only our community standards but basic decency. Behavior that, if left unchecked, could endanger our children and destroy the family-friendly atmosphere we've all worked so hard to maintain. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Patterson, who lived across from Marcus, turned in her seat to look directly at him. He felt heat rise in his cheeks but forced himself to maintain eye contact. Now I want to be clear, Karen said, raising her voice slightly to recapture attention. I take no pleasure in bringing this forward. The individual in question has, up until now, seemed like a model resident. He attends our meetings, pays his dues on time, maintains his property to our standards, which is why this situation is so particularly disturbing. She opened her manila folder and withdrew several photographs. Even from his position in the back, Marcus could see they were images of his backyard. Last Saturday afternoon, while enjoying a quiet moment in my home, I happened to glance out my bathroom window, Karen said, her voice taking on a tone of reluctant revelation. What I saw in the neighboring yard was ... shocking, disturbing, completely inappropriate for a family neighborhood. What did you see, Karen? Called out Bob Henderson from the middle of the room. Bob was Karen's most vocal supporter, a retired accountant who'd moved to Willowbrook 5 years ago and immediately aligned himself with the HOA power structure. Karen held up one of the photographs. I saw this individual engaged in what can only be described as self-gratification in broad daylight, in full view of anyone who might be looking. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Even from a distance, he could see the photo showed him standing near his tomato plants, his hands on his arms and chest, the moment he'd been applying sunscreen. That's not, Marcus started to say, rising from his chair. Please, Karen said smoothly, not even looking in his direction. Let me finish my presentation before we open the floor for discussion. The dismissal was so casual, so practiced, that Marcus found himself sitting back down almost involuntarily. Around him, neighbors were whispering, shooting glances in his direction. This behavior occurred again on Sunday morning, Karen continued, producing another photograph. Same location, same ... activities. I realized at that point that I had a responsibility to document what I was seeing, not for any prurient interest, you understand, but as evidence of a serious violation of our community standards. She set the photographs on the podium in front of her, spreading them out like playing cards. Section 7.3 of our community bylaw clearly states that residents must conduct themselves in a manner consistent with family values and community standards. Section 7.4 specifically prohibits any behavior that could be deemed indecent or offensive to neighbors. And Section 12.1 gives the HOA board the authority to take corrective action when these standards are violated. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. The woman was quoting bylaws like scripture, building a legal framework around her delusion. But what made it worse was how effective it was. He could see neighbors nodding along, their expressions growing more serious and concerned. No, I want to emphasize that I've attempted to address this matter privately, Karen continued. I approached the individual in question 2 days ago to discuss my concerns. Unfortunately, instead of showing remorse or agreeing to modify his behavior, he became hostile and defensive. He actually suggested that I was somehow in the wrong for being observant of activities visible from my own property. The way she told it, Marcus sounded like a monster. Every detail was technically accurate but twisted just enough to paint him as the aggressor, the unreasonable party in their confrontation. This brings me to the difficult decision I've had to make, Karen said, her voice taking on a sorrowful tone, effective immediately. I'm recommending that the HOA board begin proceedings to issue a formal violation notice. If the behavior continues, we'll need to consider more serious measures, including potential legal action and, ultimately, forced removal from the community. The room fell silent. Forced removal was the nuclear option in HOA disputes, requiring months of legal proceedings and usually reserved for cases involving property damage or serious safety violations. The fact that Karen was even mentioning it showed how serious she was about destroying Marcus's life. Before we proceed, she continued, I'd like to give our fellow resident an opportunity to address these concerns. Marcus, would you like to come forward and explain your actions? All eyes turned to Marcus. He felt like a defendant called to the witness stand, except the jury had already heard the prosecution's case and formed their opinions. Still, he had to try. Marcus stood and walked to the front of the room, his legs feeling unsteady. Karen stepped aside with a gracious smile, playing the role of the fair-minded leader, giving the accused his day in court. Thank you, Karen, he began, his voice steadier than he'd expected. I appreciate the opportunity to respond to these allegations. He looked out at the assembled faces. Some were openly hostile, others curious. A few seemed sympathetic. Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down gave him an encouraging nod. The photographs Mrs. Whitfield has shown you do show me in my backyard, Marcus said. But they don't show what she's claiming they show. On Saturday, I was checking my tomato plants for hornworms, a common garden pest. I was running my hands along the stems and leaves, feeling for the soft spots and holes that indicate insect damage. He gestured toward the photographs still displayed on the podium. On Sunday morning, I was applying sunscreen before beginning my yard work. I was rubbing sunscreen on my arms, my neck, and my face. Nothing more, nothing less. A few people in the audience exchanged glances. Marcus could see some uncertainty creeping into their expressions. I understand that from a distance, or from a certain angle, these innocent activities might be misinterpreted, he continued. But I want to be absolutely clear. I have never, and would never, engage in any inappropriate behavior in my backyard, or anywhere else. That's exactly what someone would say if they were caught, Bob Henderson called out. Of course you're going to deny it. Bob's right, agreed Sandra Mills from the second row. We only have your word against the photographic evidence. Marcus felt the momentum slipping away from him. Karen had done her work well, framing the situation so that his denials looked like exactly what a guilty person would say. I understand your skepticism, Marcus said, but I'd ask you to consider the source of these allegations. Mrs. Whitfield admitted to me that she's been watching me from her bathroom window, taking photographs of me without my knowledge or consent. If anyone's behavior is questionable here, isn't it the person who's been conducting surveillance on their neighbor? It was a risky move, turning the tables on Karen, but Marcus was running out of options. Karen's face flushed red. How dare you, she snapped, her composed facade cracking. I was protecting this community. I was documenting violations of our standards. By spying on me from your bathroom window, Marcus pressed. By taking secret photographs of me in my own backyard. It's not spying when the behavior is visible from my property, Karen shot back, and it's not secret when it's for legitimate documentation purposes. The room was getting heated, voices rising as neighbors began choosing sides. Marcus could see the community fracturing in real time, turning neighbor against neighbor. Enough, Karen shouted over the growing noise. This is exactly the kind of disruption I was afraid of. We have a resident who, instead of taking responsibility for his actions, is trying to blame the victim. This is a pattern of behavior that threatens the very foundation of our community. She turned to address the room directly, her voice carrying the authority of 8 years as HOA president. I'm calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in Marcus Chen's fitness to remain a resident of. Marcus was debugging code on his laptop Friday morning when the doorbell rang. Through his front window, he could see a police cruiser parked at the curb, its presence already drawing curious stares from neighbors walking their dogs and checking their mailboxes. His stomach dropped as he recognized the two officers standing on his porch, Detective Sarah Rodriguez and Officer Mike Thompson, both of whom he'd met during the neighborhood watch meetings Karen had organized last year. Mr. Chen, Detective Rodriguez said when he opened the door. She was a compact woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and an expression that gave nothing away. We'd like to ask you a few questions about some concerns that have been brought to our attention. Of course, Marcus said, stepping aside to let them in. What kind of concerns? Officer Thompson, a tall man with graying temples, pulled out a small notebook. We received a complaint yesterday evening regarding possible indecent exposure and harassment. The complainant provided photographic evidence and security camera footage. Marcus's blood ran cold. Security camera footage. Mrs. Karen Whitfield contacted us around 10 p.m. last night, Detective Rodriguez explained, settling into the chair Marcus offered. She claims you've been engaging in inappropriate behavior visible from her property, and that when she confronted you about it, it became threatening and aggressive. That's not, Marcus began, then stopped himself. He'd learned enough from corporate harassment training to know that anything he said could be twisted later. Detective, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. That's what we're here to determine, Rodriguez said. Mrs. Whitfield showed us photographs of you in your backyard, engaged in what appears to be sexual activity. She also provided video footage from her home security system that she says shows you making threatening gestures toward her property. Marcus felt the room spinning around him. Video footage. What video footage? Thompson flipped through his notebook. According to Mrs. Whitfield, her security cameras captured you on Wednesday evening, approximately 30 minutes after your initial confrontation, standing at your fence line and making what she describes as obscene gestures toward her house. Wednesday evening? Marcus remembered exactly what he'd been doing Wednesday evening, taking photographs of his own property for documentation, holding up his phone to capture the angles and sightlines from Karen's bathroom window. But he could see how that might look from a distance, especially if someone wanted it to look threatening. Officers, I was taking pictures of my own property, Marcus explained. For documentation purposes, Mrs. Whitfield has been harassing me, making false accusations, and I wanted to have my own photographic evidence of the sightlines and privacy issues. So you admit you were photographing in the direction of Mrs. Whitfield's house? Detective Rodriguez asked, making notes. Marcus realized he was walking into a trap. Every answer he gave could be twisted to support Karen's narrative. I was photographing my own property lines and fence, he said carefully. If Mrs. Whitfield's house happened to be in the background of some shots, that was incidental. Mr. Chen, Officer Thompson said, leaning forward, we need to be very clear about something. Mrs. Whitfield is claiming that you've been engaging in public indecency, and that when she attempted to address this with you privately, you became hostile and began what she characterizes as a campaign of intimidation. A campaign of intimidation? Marcus couldn't keep the incredulity out of his voice. I attended one HOA meeting where I defended myself against her false accusations. Is that intimidation? According to Mrs. Whitfield, you announced your intention to run against her for HOA president, specifically to retaliate against her for reporting your inappropriate behavior. Detective Rodriguez explained. She sees this as an attempt to use your position in the community to silence her. The twisted logic was breathtaking. Karen had turned his decision to stand up for himself into evidence of his guilt. She'd weaponized the very act of defending himself. Detective, this is insane, Marcus said. Mrs. Whitfield has been watching me from her bathroom window, taking unauthorized photographs of me in my own backyard, and spreading false rumors about me throughout the neighborhood. If anyone's been engaging in harassment, it's her. That's an interesting perspective, Rodriguez said neutrally. Can you provide any evidence to support these claims? Marcus hesitated. He had his own photographs, but they would only show what Karen had already shown them, images that could be misinterpreted depending on the viewer's preconceptions. The photographs she showed you, Marcus said instead. What exactly do they show? Thompson consulted his notebook again. Mrs. Whitfield provided 12 photographs taken over a 3-week period showing you in your backyard engaged in what appears to be masturbation. The images show you with your hands on your body, appearing to manipulate your genital area. That's completely false, Marcus said firmly. Those photographs show me gardening and applying sunscreen, nothing more. Mr. Chen, Detective Rodriguez said, her tone becoming more serious. I have to tell you that the images are fairly convincing. Combined with Mrs. Whitfield's testimony and the security footage, we have enough to proceed with charges if we choose to. The threat hung in the air like a sword. Marcus could see his entire life collapsing, his job, his home, his reputation, all based on a vindictive neighbor's twisted interpretation of innocent activities. What kind of charges? He asked quietly. Indecent exposure, harassment, possibly, intimidation of a witness. Thompson listed. The DA's office would make the final determination, but Mrs. Whitfield has built a pretty compelling case. Marcus felt something snap inside him. The unfairness of it all. The way Karen had systematically destroyed his life while portraying herself as the victim. The way the system was allowing her to weaponize law enforcement against him, it was too much. You want to know what really happened? Marcus said, his voice rising. Karen Whitfield is a controlling, manipulative woman who can't stand the thought of anyone challenging her authority. She's been spying on me, photographing me without consent. And when I had the audacity to defend myself, she decided to destroy me. Mr. Chen, Detective Rodriguez began. She's turned my neighbors against me based on lies. Marcus continued, the words pouring out of him. She's twisted every innocent action into something sinister. And now she's got you doing her dirty work for her. Sir, I need you to calm down, Officer Thompson said, his hand moving instinctively toward his belt. The movement, subtle but unmistakable, brought Marcus back to himself. He was standing in his living room, shouting at police officers, probably confirming every negative thing Karen had told them about his temperament. I'm sorry, he said, sitting down heavily. I'm just... This whole situation is insane. I'm being accused of things I didn't do by a woman who's been stalking me for weeks. Detective Rodriguez exchanged a look with her partner. Mr. Chen, here's what's going to happen. We're not arresting you today, but we're strongly advising you to stay away from Mrs. Whitfield and her property. No more confrontations, no more photographs, no more anything that could be construed as harassment. What about her harassing me? Marcus demanded. If you feel you're being harassed, you can file your own complaint, Thompson said. But right now, you're the one with the credibility problem. After the officers left, Marcus sat in his living room staring at the wall. Karen had played the game perfectly. She'd positioned herself as the victim, gathered evidence that supported her narrative, and even gotten law enforcement on her side. He was trapped in a web of his own neighbor's making, and every move he made only seemed to tighten the strands around him. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw the police at your house. Neighborhood is talking. Maybe it's time to move somewhere more suitable to your interests. A concerned neighbor. Marcus stared at the message, his hands shaking with rage. The anonymous cowardice of it perfectly captured what Karen had turned his community into, a place where neighbors spied on each other and sent threatening messages rather than having honest conversations. But as he sat there, something occurred to him. Karen's security cameras had supposedly captured him making threatening gestures Wednesday evening, but he remembered exactly where he'd been standing, exactly what he'd been doing. If her cameras had captured that, they would have captured other things too. Things that might tell a very different story than the one Karen was selling. Marcus opened his laptop and began researching security camera systems, digital forensics, and evidence preservation. If Karen wanted to play with surveillance footage, he was going to make sure he understood the rules of the game. What he didn't know was that 3 houses down, Karen Whitfield was sitting in her pristine living room, watching the police car pull away through her front window. A satisfied smile played across her lips as she reviewed the security footage on her tablet one more time. The footage was damning. It showed exactly what she'd told the police. It showed Marcus standing at the fence line, holding up his phone, pointing it directly at her house. What the police didn't need to know was what the earlier portions of the footage revealed. the timestamps, the angles. The clear evidence that she'd been recording Marcus for months before their first con. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of oppressive humidity that made the air itself feel thick and suffocating. Marcus sat on his back patio, staring at the fence line where this nightmare had begun just 4 days ago. His laptop was open, beside him, displaying the results of 6 hours of intensive research into digital forensics and surveillance law. What he'd learned had given him hope for the first time since the police visit. Karen's security cameras were a high-end system, the kind that stored footage both locally and in the cloud. More importantly, they were the kind that recorded audio along with video, a fact that could work in his favor if he could prove what was really captured on Wednesday evening. The sound of a car door slamming drew his attention. Through the slats in his fence, he could see Karen's silver BMW pulling into her driveway. She was returning from what looked like a dinner out, dressed in an elegant black dress that probably cost more than Marcus made in a week. She looked radiant, victorious, like a woman celebrating a hard-fought triumph. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He walked to the fence line and called over to her. "Karen, we need to talk." She turned toward his voice, and, even in the dim light, he could see her expression shift from contentment to sharp alertness. "I have nothing to say to you, Marcus, and my attorney has advised me not to have any contact with you whatsoever." "Your attorney?" Marcus felt a cold laugh escape him. "You've lawyered up for this." "I've taken necessary precautions," Karen said, moving toward her back door. "You're clearly unstable, and I won't be intimidated by your continued harassment." "Karen, please," Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of desperation he didn't have to fake. "Just give me 5 minutes. Let me explain what really happened. You're destroying my life over a misunderstanding." Karen paused at her door, her hand on the handle. For a moment, Marcus thought she might actually listen, but when she turned back to face him, her expression was cold and pitiless. "There's no misunderstanding, Marcus. I know exactly what kind of person you are. The police know it. Soon the whole neighborhood will know. You brought this on yourself." "The police don't know the whole story," Marcus said, stepping closer to the fence. "They only know what you told them. They know what the evidence shows," Karen corrected. "Photographs don't lie, Marcus. Video footage doesn't lie." "No, but people do," Marcus shot back. "People manipulate evidence. People leave out crucial details. People like you." Karen's composure cracked slightly. "How dare you accuse me of lying? I'm the victim here, are you?" Marcus pressed. "Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone who's been planning this for weeks. Someone who's been watching me, photographing me, building a case against me based on twisted interpretations of innocent behavior." "Innocent behavior." Karen's voice rose to a shout. "You call exposing yourself in your backyard innocent behavior. I call applying sunscreen and checking my plants for pests." Exactly what it was. Normal homeowner activities that you perverted into something disgusting because you can't stand the thought of anyone challenging your authority. "That's ridiculous," Karen snapped. "You think this is about HOA politics? You think I would fabricate evidence over a power struggle?" "I think you're exactly the kind of person who would do that," Marcus said, his own voice rising now. "I think you're a manipulative, controlling woman who's used her position to bully this neighborhood for years. And when someone finally stood up to you, you decided to destroy them." Karen's face was flushed with rage now. All pretense of wounded victimhood abandoned. "You arrogant piece of trash. You think you can move into my neighborhood and challenge me? I built this community. I made it what it is. Your neighborhood." Marcus laughed bitterly. "You don't own this place, Karen. You're just another resident who got drunk on a little bit of power." "I have more power than you can imagine," Karen snarled. "And I'm going to use every bit of it to make sure you're destroyed, not just removed from this neighborhood. Your job, your reputation, your future, all of it." "Why?" Marcus demanded. "What did I ever do to you?" "You existed," Karen screamed, her voice echoing off the houses around them. "You existed in my space, in my perfect community, being exactly the kind of person who doesn't belong here. Single men like you, you're all the same. Perverts, degenerates, bringing down property values and corrupting family neighborhoods." The mask had finally come off completely. This wasn't about inappropriate behavior or community standards. This was about Karen's own twisted prejudices and her need to control every aspect of her environment. "So you admit it?" Marcus said quietly. "This was never about anything I actually did. This was about who you think I am." "It doesn't matter what I think," Karen said, but her voice was less certain now. "What matters is what the evidence shows. And the evidence shows exactly what I said it shows." "Does it?" Marcus pulled out his phone. "Because I've been doing some research, Karen, about your security system, about digital forensics, about audio recording laws." Karen went very still. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that your security cameras don't just record video, Karen, they record audio too. And audio recordings capture a lot more context than still photographs." The color drained from Karen's face. "You're fishing. You don't know anything about my security system. I know it's a SkyGuard Pro system with cloud backup and 60-day retention, Marcus said, consulting his phone. I know it records in 4K with stereo audio. And I know that everything we said to each other Wednesday evening was captured in perfect digital clarity. Karen's hand tightened on her door handle. Even if that were true, it wouldn't matter. Those recordings are my private property. Actually, they're not, Marcus said, his voice gaining confidence. When you provided edited footage to police as evidence in a potential criminal case, you opened the door for discovery. Any decent defense attorney would subpoena the complete, unedited recordings. You can't afford a decent defense attorney, Karen said, but the venom was gone from her voice. She sounded scared now. Maybe not, Marcus agreed, but I can afford to file a civil lawsuit for harassment, defamation, and invasion of privacy. And in civil court, I can demand access to all the evidence you've been collecting, including the parts you didn't share with the police. Karen was backing toward her door now, clearly desperate to end this conversation. But Marcus wasn't done. Tell me, Karen, when the police hear the complete audio from Wednesday night, what are they going to think about your claim that I was threatening you? What are they going to think when they hear you admitting that you've been photographing me without consent? When they hear you threatening to destroy my life? You don't know what you're talking about, Karen said, but her voice was bare above a whisper. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Marcus said, and here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Detective Rodriguez first thing Monday morning. You're going to tell her that you've reviewed your security footage more carefully and realized you may have misinterpreted what you saw. You're going to withdraw your complaint and issue a public apology to the neighborhood for the disruption this has caused. I will not, Karen flared, finding her voice again. I will not be intimidated by your threats. These aren't threats, Karen. These are consequences. You wanted to play with evidence and police reports and legal intimidation. Well, congratulations, you're about to find out what happens when someone actually knows how to play that game. Karen fumbled with her door handle, clearly desperate to escape. But in her haste, she dropped her purse, spilling its contents across her back patio. Among the scattered items, something caught the light, a small black device that Marcus recognized. Immediately, is that a voice recorder, Karen? He asked. Karen's eyes widened in panic as she scrambled to collect her belongings. It's nothing. Mind your own business. But Marcus had seen enough. You've been recording our conversations. All of them, even this one. So what if I have? Karen said, clutching the device protectively. It's perfectly legal to record conversations. On my own property, it is, Marcus agreed. And those recordings are going to make fascinating evidence in my lawsuit, especially the parts where you admit to fabricating charges against me. Karen stood frozen on her patio, the weight of her situation finally hitting her. She'd been so focused on destroying Marcus that she'd never considered the possibility that her own evidence gathering might be turned against her. You can't prove anything, she said desperately. It's your word against mine. No, Karen, Marcus said quietly. It's your words against you, your own recordings, your own security footage, your own documented campaign of harassment. You built the case against yourself. As if summoned by the escalating confrontation, lights began coming on in neighboring houses. Faces appeared at windows. Mrs. Patterson from across the street stepped onto her front porch, clearly listening to every word. You want to know the really ironic part? Marcus continued, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. If you'd just minded your own business, none of this would have happened. I would have continued being the model neighbor, following all your rules, never causing any problems, but you couldn't leave well enough alone. Karen looked around at the watching neighbors, realizing